Okay, let me say this. Sometimes you just got to play the fool and let them think that you are the fool. Because you got to realize this. Sometimes people will take your gifts of sensitivity and just who you are as a person, period, and they will assume that you are weak. They will assume that you're a pushover. They will assume that you're a fool because you are not really out there like they are. And I'll give you the example. Even when you look at David and Saul, right? Saul thought David was just the weakest person. Saul looked at himself because he felt like he was the king, and Saul felt like because he was the king and David was like this harp player, that David was insignificant, that David didn't even really, he didn't have no strength in him. So Saul looked at himself as being this high and mighty person because he had this position of a king. And when he looked at David as a fool because all David was just a harp player. But see, here was the catch. What Saul didn't know was that what Saul couldn't see in David, God already gave David the throne of a king. But because Saul felt like physically he was sitting on that throne physically, that David was nothing. David was just this fool, this harp player, this weak person that didn't have no position. And this is how it is in life. Sometimes you have to let people go ahead and think that you're the fool. Sometimes your quietness is the best thing you can do for situations. Sometimes it don't even require a response. It don't require you to be loud. It doesn't require you to feel like you have to always have the outcome or the last say so. But if you look at David and Saul, Saul had this big old ego about him. And he made himself known that he was the king. He made himself known that he was the one in charge. And he made sure every opportunity David knew that he was the one in charge. And he was just the harp player. And David was his servant. But what Saul didn't know is that God was already preparing David for something greater. But see, David was so humble with how he was able to just sit back in the background. Sometimes you don't have to sit in the front seat. Sometimes it's okay to sit in the background and let people think that this person ain't got nothing going on for themselves. They ain't got no motion. They ain't got nothing going on. And that's how Saul felt about David. He felt like David had no motion. David ain't got nothing going on. David is just his harp player, that he's my servant. And so Saul took that and ran with that. And so every opportunity that Saul was able to rub it in David's face, that you ain't nothing but just a harp player. You're my servant. I'm the king. You're nothing. And when I say to you, every opportunity, David sat back so humble. Didn't have to say a word. Didn't have to defend himself. Didn't have to tell Saul anything. But all David did was stand in his position until God elevated him. Until God was ready to tell David to come out and do what God wanted David to do at that point. And I say that to say this, that sometimes people will always put themselves above you. And they will literally make themselves feel like you are just their servant, like you just the peasant. And sometimes it's okay to sit back and just be humble and take your position like David did. And understand that just like David didn't have to prove anything to Saul, David literally just stayed in his position as the harp player. And I'm pretty sure it was moments where David was kind of like, he was just mind blown by how the fact that Saul was so arrogant, so prideful, so ego driven, like you just high and mighty. But David also knew God enough to know that, okay, God, I'm hurt and I see certain things that's happening, but I'm going to stay in my position. I don't have to speak. I don't have to be seen. I don't have to be known. I just have to do what it is you need me to do in this time in God. And David did. And so God was ready to elevate David to the next level. And when God was ready, God literally elevated David to the next level and prepared a whole table for David. Not even because David deserved it, but God gave it all to David because David's heart, the heart that David had, was ready to receive it all. So look at it like this. All that time that Saul was the king and David was the harp player, God was literally preparing David's heart. That's all God was doing. God was literally taking David's heart and just preparing him for something greater he was going to give him down the road. But David had to still humble himself. And David had to sit in the background, and David had to just sit back and not allow himself to be heard or seen sometimes, but just let him have the spotlight. Let Saul have that spotlight. And when God was ready, God said, okay, now David, it's your turn. All this time, I let you sit on the sidelines playing that harp. I was just trying to prepare your heart. I was literally trying to prepare your vessel, trying to prepare your spirit for what I was going to give you, so that I know if I gave it to you, you won't become arrogant. You won't become ego-driven. You won't allow yourself to tear down other people just because you got this place now. And I think when God finally moved David to a higher level, David's heart was so ready for that position. And when I say to you, David was such a humble king. That is what you call the heart of God. So Saul was put in that position, and God gave Saul so much grace and time to get it together. And every opportunity, Saul decided not to get it together. And when God was ready and God knew David's heart was ready, God said, now I can trust you, David, with this position. And God created David to be that king, the most humble king. And I'm not saying that David got it right. And I'm not saying David did everything right, because I'm pretty sure it was things that David did that was probably messed up. But the difference between Saul and David is this. Saul did not have a heart for God. David had a heart after God. Saul did not. So I say that to say this, that we're going to always have mess ups and screw ups in life. We're going to do things that we're going to look back and be like, now, why did I do that? Why did I act like that? Why did I behave like that? But here is the difference between the two. Saul had a lot of screw ups and mess ups. David had a lot of screw ups and mess ups. But the difference, Saul didn't have a heart after God. David did.
Did you hear? All Domino's pizzas are half off.
Bye-bye.